be similarities in entrepreneurial journeys, but rarely are two journeys ever the same. And it's why I'm not coming in with slides or this is your 10-step pathway to success for your entrepreneurial journey. I think I did learn a few things. I learned a lot of things while doing it, but that's why I'm not going to just come and teach about lean startup, jobs to be done framework, fire innovation process, or whatever. Being an entrepreneur doesn't even mean you have to have a scaled startup. You can have a small business and be an entrepreneur too. So the risks are similar. A startup does not an entrepreneur make, and you have to do what's right for you. So that being said, I'll start by talking a little bit about my journey and would love to help answer any questions that you might have after this, if there's a way to open this up for questions. I would love to have more of a conversation. My preference is to be a bit more informal and conversational. And I think this is your first fully virtual one, so that might be challenging, but we'll see what we can do through Zoom. So just to give you a bit of a background on myself, I did end up going to college. I majored in journalism. I grew up in Tennessee, and just going to undergrad to me was a huge accomplishment. I had already achieved all of the goals that I thought I was going to have for myself, honestly, by just getting through college. And when I first started working in what I'll call my adult jobs, I guess, that were in my career path, I started in public relations. So I worked at Music City News, Media and Marketing, and it was a very small startup, if you will. It was a PR firm. So I was a publicist, and I created press kits and trying to do like score interviews for the artists that we represented. I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, so that's kind of a hub for country music. And we represented artists like Mindy McCready, Aaron Tippin, Eddie Money, which I'm sure nobody on this webinar has any idea who those people are. But if you Google Eddie Money, I guarantee you've heard at least one of his songs. And I know I'm really dating myself here, but it was a small business. And while working in the music industry kind of sounds sexy, it was anything but that. It was actually in an apartment complex, and my office was in a closet. So that was a very eye-opening way to run a business, because when I was in college, my perception was that you're going to have the office, you're going to have to dress up, you're going to have, I had a completely different viewpoint when I first started working from what I think was sold to me while I was in school. And eventually I left the PR firm and went to more of a creative firm that did have public relations, an aspect to it, but it did a lot of things. We did some web design, and I set up the MySpace accounts for a lot of our clients. So like at the dawn of social media. And this was, again, a small firm. I just found myself in small creative firms. And I really didn't have any mentors or anyone telling me how to do my job. So I kind of just created a lot of stuff that helped me do my job better. And I did apply some things that I learned in school, but honestly, I learned a lot on the job from direct feedback. And over time at that particular position, I learned that our clients that I brought in, who seemed very happy in what I was selling, and when they came into the firm, they were really pissed off, and I didn't understand why. And it turns out that that particular person who was running that business, she was stealing money from our clients and washing checks, and ended up being federally prosecuted. And so that kind of tainted my viewpoint of like, wow, this is what happens, and this could happen, and how could this even happen to me, and just this early on in my career. And I was ended up subpoenaed and had to like testify against her. It was really, it was an interesting experience, and learned very quickly. And one of the other things that I also learned is that I thought I could do it better than what she was doing. If I was selling and getting all of these clients in, meanwhile, I'm 22 years old. I was young and had no idea really what I was doing. I was still learning. I thought, well, I'll just start my own company. And so I ended up hiring on 2 people, and this was in 2007, and started growing my firm and using my selling abilities, but also the other creative abilities that I had learned through PR as well as marketing, and had a world-renowned horse training product that we did marketing for and PR that even the Queen of England used. I worked with even smaller services firms, everything from HVAC, heating and air, to national spa chains, and thought I was doing pretty well. Again, young, didn't know what was going on. And then 2008 happened. And I don't know if anyone, I doubt anyone here remembers 2008, but it was an economic collapse, and it was a recession. And in doing that, a lot of my clients went out of business, and therefore I went out of business. So went from doing really successfully to, again, living in my car that eventually I sold and had to use a bicycle. Broke up with my co-founder in that business, and I was terrified to take a risk again. I didn't want to take a risk. I just wanted some form of stability. And I ended up going and begging for a job at a bike shop, and because I enjoyed riding bicycles, and I was using it quite a bit, getting pretty good, having not worked, having to sell my car after losing the business. So, and that to me was kind of normal for me. I grew up understanding money was always going to be a struggle. So I was right where I thought I should be, honestly. But eventually working at that bike shop in retail, even after I swore off I would never go back to bartending, I would never do those things again, which looking back now, like I'm very thankful for that experience, because I did regain confidence and I put a lot of trust. I learned a lot at that bike shop and doing marketing and sales, and was given a lot of freedom. And what that allowed me to do was make a lot of connections. And I ended up joining another startup. So this was in physical products. So this was in textiles, and started making socks. And you would never think that a sock is a complex piece of garment or apparel to make, but it's actually quite challenging to do. So a friend of mine was doing it, brought me on. We were literally selling socks out of the trunk of his car. And these were socks that were athletic socks for primarily cyclists and runners. And you probably, I guarantee, go now to a store in your area and see if you can find these socks. It's called Swiftwick, but they are now the #1 sock in cycling and running. And I guarantee you probably have seen them in existence somewhere at a shop. And so through that, we had to break some rules because it was small. So I think that's something that I also learned, is that when you're small, you kind of have to you got to do what you got to do in order to grow. And so like there was a very large trade show that was called Interbike, and it was reaching our target audience. And we ended up paying someone who had already paid for a booth. We couldn't spend $10,000 to secure a booth. So they let us come on if we worked part-time for their booth, and they let us schlep our socks while we were in there, and everyone loved them. And it was something that we had to do that I think made us think creatively about how we would do it. And I don't know if anyone's ever had to work in trade shows or event planning, but they're incredibly expensive. So it's just something that we had to kind of break the rules, but it worked out for us in the long run. And eventually that job led me across the country. I followed my passions. I wanted the lifestyle upgrade, which is why I'm in Colorado. So I moved from Tennessee to Colorado. And I worked actually in a nonprofit. So went from small for-profit companies to a nonprofit focused on conservation, education, and recreation, which is a great way to learn my state, got me outside, which was some of the things that I was passionate about. And I had a lot of freedom. So I started Colorado Women's Cycling Project that you heard in my introduction. And what Colorado Women's Cycling Project was started as a passion project with 3 women. We liked racing our bikes, but if you're familiar with racing bicycles, it's not a cheap sport. So that was something that we had to raise money for if we wanted to be able to do it and do it professionally. And we started the club, and we each begged one other person. So we grew from 3 to 6. And then over time, this club is still in existence today. So it's this company is, and we secured in the 2nd year of operation over $100,000 from PepsiCo as our title sponsor. And it was Naked Women's Racing, Naked Juice. If you ever see that in grocery stores, that's who sponsored us. And that was something that I think was perhaps another lesson was I had a full-time job, but I was doing this thing where it was something that was fun, that was allowing us to race our bikes for free and make a little bit of money. But we didn't completely give up our day job to go pursue this. And I think that's maybe a lie that's sold a lot, is if you're not 100% committed in this startup, then you're not going to be successful. And I don't know if anyone has seen or read any of the case studies around Warby Parker as an example. If you're familiar with Warby Parker as a company, this is where my glasses are from. It was a startup, and all of them were still hedging their bets and making sure that they were going into school and working not only on the startup on the side, but also in school. So they didn't want to completely give up just in case if it were to fail. So I think that's something that I also kind of had this misconception that you had to be 1000% fully committed and take all of these giant risks. We were able to do this and we're successful. And we eventually won USA Cycling, which is the governing body of sport for cycling, at least in the US. We won the Cycling Club of the Year. So that was a really big, there's 80,000 members, and we were able to win with that. And that was something that I think again helped instill a little bit more confidence from my previous failures. And eventually ended up moving into a tech startup. And I promise I'm almost done with my background to keep this more conversational and can answer any questions. But I decided to move to a tech startup. I moved away from the nonprofit because, like I said, when I met Russ, I was $100,000 in debt. I had a lot of student loan debt, and I needed to pay that off. So I wanted to be in a career that was a bit more lucrative than nonprofit. So I started working in web and mobile applications, so software development. And I think that was a small company, and that was one where it kind of really helped jumpstart an understanding truly scale and how to scale something outside of like socks physical product, but something that was digital in nature. And I think with that, which by the way, if you are working in a startup, I have a great book I'd love to drop in the chat that you should check out. A friend of mine wrote it. And it's Power to the Startup People, but it's if you're an employee in a startup, that's something that she borrowed a lot from a lot of different people. It's endorsed by Brad Feld, but and I think he wrote her forward, but it's about how to grow your startup, or how to grow in a startup when you're not the founder. Because I learned a lot from startups. So and working in them, not as a founder. So I think that that's something that it's a good book. So it's an easy read too. So you can pick that up if you get the chance. And I learned a lot there. So, and while at that tech startup, I started another business again. So that's one thing I think that perhaps is true about entrepreneurship, is that it's really hard to, if you do it, you find ways to solve problems all the time. And that's just kind of how the lens with which I view the world is that, that's something that should be a company, or that should be something, we should fix this. And that's kind of how I steamroll into a lot of other things. But I started a business again, and this was lead out sales. And it was kind of interesting. I didn't intend to start this business. So it was a person that I was trying to sell these services to in software development. And he said, no, but I really like what you're doing and how you're doing it for this company. Why don't you do that for me? And not just go be an employee. I want you to be a contractor. I can just be one of your clients. And it was kind of a reverse starting a company. As I said, yes, I didn't know. I knew from my previous time having run a creative firm that, yes, I can do this. I know how to do the legal stuff and create MSAs and SOWs and all of the acronyms to do it. And so I ended up doing work for him, and he really enjoyed it. And so then I started networking under the guise of lead out sales, and brought in a lot more business that way. So I actually recruited somebody who used to work for me, who was ready to leave her job and do something else. So she started dabbling with me, and we started working it out together, and we ended up making 6 figures in about 3 months of doing that business. And I was still working full-time again while doing that. And grew that firm. And eventually the day job company, the software company I was working for, it was sold. and it was acquired. So that's one thing that startups typically like to do, is to either, like, if you're not going to do a public offering, are you acquired? Do you merge? How do you continue this growth trajectory? And so we were acquired by what's a Fortune 150 or Fortune 500. You may have heard of that, but it's like the 500 largest companies by revenue. And it was a massive company, 275,000 people. I had never worked at places that were greater than 50 people before. So that was a very different experience. I hated it. I was not good at working in a very large company. I didn't even get my computer for like 7 months from that company. So it was just very different, and made me wonder, like, there were some things that I took so personally if I couldn't fix it in my startup. And I think in growing in that startup, like, and then seeing this large company with 275,000 people that you could throw at a problem, but they still couldn't fix it, it made me feel a little bit better about some of the problems that I had in my own. So it gave me a bit of perspective, and I still wasn't ready to make the jump to fully committing to my own business again, because I was still in debt from student loans. But eventually I paid them off very quickly and started working at another company, another startup that they brought me in to help scale. And this time it was in Latin and South America. So it was an interesting experience, working with a lot of people from Costa Rica and Colombia, and help them grow from less than 50 to 300 in about 7 months. So it was very, very, very fast moving. And it was still in software, and was still running my business on the side. So I was not getting sleep. I was probably taking years off of my life, which I don't recommend. However, I did get out of debt. And I will share, this is an article that I wrote several years ago, about for Startup Grind, how I paid off $70,000 in student loans in 9 months. So you can read that if you want to, if you feel so inclined. So lead out sales was still continuing to grow. And I ended up, one of the clients wanted to bring and acquire my company. So this was where not only acquire company, but also the staff that was in this company. And I don't know if where and what classes you're in from an entrepreneurship standpoint, but if you have a company that there's a lot of things that go into purchasing a company, but if you have a product and you have investors, typically they want to see huge returns. And if you have a consulting company, that's very different. Your valuation, or how much your company is worth, might not be worth as much as like a Facebook and Instagram that has a product with billions of users, or even millions of users. So your valuation is typically 1x, or like 1 time what your company is actually bringing in revenue wise, or 1.5x, maybe more if you have pioneered some or have a trademark or IP of some sort around a framework or something along those lines. But it was 1.5x. So like all of my employees, they ended up getting significant pay raises coming into this company. They just had to stay there for a certain period of time. And I had to stay there for at least 2 years for all of this to come to fruition. But it ended up going to getting acquired by this company, Cable Labs. So it's an innovation lab. And I don't know if you've heard the term intrapreneurship at all. You've heard of entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship is kind of, you could Google it. I don't even know if it's actually in the dictionary, but like it's talking about being an entrepreneur. So oftentimes, like you're given a product, a problem, or something along those lines that you can solve inside of a company and act like a startup. The benefits being usually you have bigger pockets, so more money, more runway to run it. And we had an accelerator in this company that I was on the board for and had fiduciary responsibility for the startups that we brought in and connecting them to a $500 billion industry. So it was fascinating. It was an interesting experience to come in and get to operate in the way that Lead Out Sales did inside of this company, build a team, and then also get to be a part of this accelerator for startups, and still working with them as well as global companies. So that was, it was interesting in that sense. And I had to stay there for 2 years. And I ended up staying there actually for 4 years. And my employees, they were all very happy at first, and eventually they left and they started their own companies, which I'm very proud of. And one, she started a social enterprise, so the International Indigenous Youth Council, and she actually won the Robert F. Kennedy Humanitarian Award. So that's somebody who went on their own entrepreneurship journey that I got a chance to work with. The other is running rental car companies in Aspen, Vale, and Jackson Hole. She's doing really well. Both are women and both kicking ass. And I stayed, but I got burnt out, if I'm being honest. I went from getting to do a lot and build a lot to just more meetings and communication. And honestly, if you kind of did that journey that I was describing, it's challenging. And I didn't like being on a plane every other day. That's just not my MO. I'd rather be in the mountains or in the woods. And I ended up getting here. I'll share another thing that kind of motivated my next life. I'm taking some time off right now. So luckily I have the luxury now. I don't have to work, but you can't turn your brain off from entrepreneurship. So I'm doing another business that I'll describe in a little bit, but this is kind of what motivated me, because time spends the same whether you have money or not. And that's what's most important to me. So this is Wait But Why. I have a life calendar, and you can't see it because I've got my background blurred because the room's a bit of a mess, but it's your life if you live to be 90 in weeks. So it's just a bunch of squares on this calendar, and like I'm getting to be almost halfway through, and seeing that, like, what do I want to do? I want to do all the things that I said I've never, like, I put off to go do all of these other things that were important to me. So that's when I left in February, and now it's something that I think I was just so used to through unresolved childhood traumatic experiences growing up that I didn't realize I could stop and breathe and take time. I don't know if you know Tim Urban, but I've hired Tim Urban actually to come speak at some conferences. He's hilarious, and you should watch some of his videos. I think he's done a TED Talk. He's kind of crazy, but he created that life calendar, and it's a really good read. He does very long form content. So now what am I doing? I decided I'm going to write a book, and that's honestly, I can say, is the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought that would be easy on my time off. It's not, especially kind of writing creatively when you've been writing for business audiences for so long. And that's going to be published hopefully in 2022. I have till February to submit my manuscript. And I'm also starting a company that was mainly just for my own personal goals. I wanted to make more friends who wanted to play outside. And since I have this time that I'm getting into the mountains, I'm trying to climb all the 14ers, which, by the way, I think Russ is on your call. He used to have the record for the fastest descent up all the 14ers in California, which is kind of insane to me. I just want to climb them, not at any particular pace, but preferably before 90, I guess. But so it's a user-generated content media company. And I don't know if anyone's heard of DAOs, but I am trying to experiment with Web3. And I'm going to say a lot of terms. I'm sure everyone here has heard of blockchain, but this is a decentralized autonomous organization. I want to build a company in a different way. I want to build it without hierarchy, or very light on hierarchy. And I want it to be automated such that if you do X amount of work or contribute X amount of capital, you are rewarded with these particular dollars that then go into a treasury, and we distribute accordingly. And we all know what our purpose and mission is, and you can go pull down the work that you want to do. And it helps us towards our mission. And as we become profitable, everybody else becomes profitable. And I'll send you a link around DAOs, but it's really fascinating to me, and how they do it. And you're incentivized on, so Mikey's heard of them, but so that's and there's a lot if you start Googling around and seeing it, but I think it's a really appealing way of doing business now. And I think that it's kind of like, if you watch YouTube videos of people talking about the internet before they understood what it was, this is what I feel like blockchain and the capacities of Web3 are going to have as big, if not bigger, impact on the way that we do business. So I'm wanting to experiment with something that I'm passionate about, getting women outside and playing outside and having a good time and creating media with that. How can we reward that participation? And that's how I want to build that. So I'm in the process of doing that now. I actually have another call with somebody who's in Lisbon after this to figure out the nuts and bolts of how am I going to get a developer to help me in building some of this, because it's still very early. And lastly, I invest in startups now. So that's something that I enjoy doing. I have invested in an alcoholic kombucha startup called Mortal Kombucha. And yes, it is a play on Mortal Kombat, but it's a fun business that grew 408% last year. So I think that I'm doing pretty well on my investment. And the reason why I invested in that company is because it was a personal friend. We were on a bike ride talking about this. I said, you should do it. And she did it. And I promised her I would be one of her first investors, and was. So she's growing really well. You can find it in Whole Foods. You can natural grocers. So and I know she's in California in quite a few grocery stores. So you'll probably see it there. Also, Interview IA is another startup that I'm invested in, and it's supposed to help remove bias from the interview process. So it's a product company, well, not physical, but software product. They are just starting out. So this is still relatively new. And then another company that I've just recently invested in is Suna, which is also doing really well. They actually productized a service. So video and photo industry. And when you think of making a video, that can cost like $5,000 on the cheapest end to hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars if you want to create a 3-minute video. And they have figured out how to do it in such a way that it's actually cheaper than purchasing stock photography. And they've opened up in Austin, Minneapolis, Denver, Atlanta, and they're going to be hopefully massive, but they're great. And they're also doing headshots for all. So if a Suna does open up near you and you need a headshot to get a job or to put on LinkedIn, they do free headshots for anyone and everyone, because that is helping her mission. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm going to drop in my contact information so everyone has it there, so you can see what I'm building with Babs, which is the Web3 company. You can sign up to be on the list to my email list for book when that's published, and you can see lead out sales there. So that's all my contact information. And yeah, that's it. I talked for quite a long time without breathing and getting any questions. So does anyone have any questions or any conversation? I also don't want to keep you up if you are in another time zone. That is my talk.
I think my question would be kind of what was that transition period like from going to a student to kind of jumping into that startup, and like how you said it was really quick. So kind of how was that transition of sitting in the classroom learning to now putting it into use and kind of being shoved into that?
Yeah, I think, well, so one of the things that helped when I was an undergrad in my senior year, we had a senior project where we worked with a real company. And that was Bridgestone Firestone, so the tire company. And we had to create this 3-year business to business marketing plan for them. And my team actually won. Which was really helpful in understanding who to talk to, because I think what students of the teams that we were competing against, they tried to apply textbooks, like what they learned in class, and tried to apply that same thing that they learned in class to that problem, but that wasn't the way to solve that problem. We found the person to talk to who was going to be the decision maker, and we actually asked him. So he was really helpful in that. And that's one thing that kind of set it off in my head, that if I just try to follow the rules of what I've been taught, I don't think I'm going to succeed as well as I could if I tried something else. And I think that's also just kind of my MO a little bit too, for better or for worse. It certainly got me in trouble too. But I think that was something that was helpful in that. And then honestly, I wanted a job. I was bartending, making more money bartending than I was the first 5 years of my big girl career. So that was, I knew I had to buckle down and make a commitment to something. And I had a couple of different jobs, but I took the lesser paying job in the field that I wanted to be in. And I think that was helpful, even though it was not my expectations. It was not like working with this massive corporation. And I don't know if that's helpful, if that answers any of your questions. My experiences in school, I think the best experience was actually working with a real company. And leading into that, the next thing I think was not just desperation, wanting to have a job, but understanding at least a little bit long-term, I need to make a commitment to working in this career if I truly want to be in it, and see if I like it or not. Cool. And I see some questions here. Have a few questions for Mikey. What is the goal with your book? So what is the hardest part for you when hiring people? Okay, so a few questions. Well, what's the goal with my book? The book is just something that I've always wanted to do, and I've enjoyed writing, though I haven't gotten to do it for myself. My theme that I'm toying with is actually how unresolved childhood trauma can make you the perfect employee, but in all the wrong ways. So there's actually quite a few studies out there of adverse childhood experiences and how that shows up in work. And for example, excessive presenteeism, and it kind of ties into Russ, this question might seem that some might have, you seem hyper motivated. Like, I think that is in response to, if I don't do this, I don't eat. Or I don't have a roof. That's part of how that motivated me and how I showed up at work. And that's not healthy either. So it's as told through my life, but of the things that I've learned over time, because that does contribute to burnout if you're not careful with it. And those are things that only I could have learned after having done them. So that's part of the goal with my book. I'm giving another talk in November to a women's business leaders WIC, to Women in Cable Technology out here. So giving a talk, and I'm testing out that theme. That's how I've been writing it thus far. So we'll see how well it does. And what's the hardest part for you when hiring people? I feel I've hired a couple of not so great people, but I think one of the things, I've been really lucky to hire good people. And I think because I'm looking at not what can they do, but what's their capacity for learning. Because a lot of people I've had to teach what I want done, because you can't pick it up in a framework. You can't pick it up in this thing. I want to see how their brain works. And I think that's something that's really helped. So I loved hiring young people and watching them come up and see how certain things click, and like how they think of ideas differently as well too, and apply it. Also, they didn't necessarily have something that worked for them. They've been doing it for 10 years. They've always done it this way. They're never going to do it another way. They're open to trying new things. So I always hired not for the skill set that they had, but what was their capacity for learning. And that hasn't failed me. I've done a really good job in seeing, I think, the power in people before they even see it. And I feel very lucky that I've had co-founders of people who previously worked for me. I like to see if they have an entrepreneurial spirit, and maybe have they tried something and failed, which I think shows that they're willing to take a risk as well too. And what was the last company you mentioned that creates? Oh, Suna. So Suna.co. There you go. Yeah. And this is actually a woman. She's venture backed. So she went and raised money, venture, and her business partner, who also happens to be a woman, which is really challenging to get venture funding for women founded companies. I think the statistics are still pretty abysmal, like 1.5%, I think. And I need to look that up, but it's still very, very low. But she was able to go out and raise venture. And she also had a previous company that she sold. that was a similar kind of like my lead out sales, but she did it from a consulting side. And she's great. She was just recently in like Business Insider, New York Times, a lot of things. So she's killing it, and I'm so happy for her for that. This is a question that I have. You seem hyper motivated. What makes you motivated to do all the things you described? And what would you suggest for someone interested in entrepreneurship but not hyper motivated in general? So I think I kind of described why I was hyper motivated or how it came about. Now I'm having to kind of unlearn some of those things. And what would you suggest for someone interested in entrepreneurship but not hyper motivated in general? I think maybe try looking at your passions if you want. I used to say don't work within your passions, work in something that you can keep that life separate. But now I'm kind of combining the two, and you just have to see what works for you. But find something that you're passionate about and maybe work in a startup in that if you are passionate about it. So if it's skiing, that you really love skiing, then go maybe work at a new board company or new ski company or something along those lines, or a wax company that is made for those boards. So you could try it in that sense. You could also reach out and see if they have internships in those particular positions. I think you could try entrepreneurship, that word that I used earlier, because entrepreneurship, even if you're working in a startup, you do feel some of that pressure, even if you're not a founder, to succeed, because your runway may only be 9 months and you might not be a company after that. So I think you could try entrepreneurship, which is often a little less risky. And there are lots of corporate accelerators that you could work in. So as an example, like Johnson & Johnson has a corporate accelerator that you could maybe even try your startup and look in that. And Techstars, they have a ton of, they're an accelerator as well, Y Combinator. I wouldn't necessarily do, those are like you have to work pretty hard, but there are Techstars joint, like with GM as an example. So you could go and work there, and it's a little different. They borrow some of the frameworks. So it's something that I think that helps you in learning that entrepreneurship journey with a little less risk, similar to the entrepreneurship UpRamp, which was our accelerator that we had within Cable Labs. That was also being able to do that with a little bit more funding in that as well. So I think entrepreneurship is great. Finding something that's related to your passion could perhaps help, because that might make you excited. Or if you just need a job, maybe you aren't that jazzed about entrepreneurship. And one of the things, I worked for a very brief time in a Fortune 500 and I hated it. I was not good at it because it was very easy to hide and you didn't have to work very hard. So it was something that I just was not, I felt like I was getting dumber when I worked there. So, but that was me. Somebody might really love that. I know some people who used to work in startups and have their own startups, and they hate it, that they love working in corporate because like they burnt themselves out. They can relax, they can put in there 30 to 40 hours a week, sometimes less, a lot of times less. And you have a lot more money to solve problems with. So and problems are solved at a much slower pace. So that could also just be something that might work for you. And it's not bad, it's not good, it's just another way of working. It's a good question.
What's your advice for students that want to create a startup but are scared to due to financial reasons or debt?
Yeah, I've got lots around that. You don't have to quit your day job. You can do both. Now, there are some places that have you sign employment agreements where you can't do that. And there are sometimes, and there are things that you want to make sure you read the fine print, because if you created something that actually did have legs and your company is paying for your internet, that means they own it. I think Google does that, where they will offer to pay for your internet at home. And if you take that and you actually create a successful startup, they're going to go and look and see like, oh, well, you did this, so we own the IP now because you did it on our computers. So just make sure you to read the fine print. But you can do, at some of my companies I work for, they encourage you to have other outside things that you were doing, and many were in leadership as well. So you could do it in that way. You could also sit on a board. You might have to do this maybe in nonprofit early on, because there are, like, if you're going to sit on a larger board, you could also be an advisor. So I was an advisor for startups. And so that helps you kind of learn, and you can even earn shares for some of those things. So those are ways that are very low risk to get involved. And like I said, if you want to create your own, you can still do it while you're working full time, depending upon your current situation that you're in. Just watch out for burnout, because it can happen. And I think the biggest thing is set yourself a goal. Like, are you doing it because you just are having fun, or do you want to make money off of it? And like understanding what you want out of it when you go into it, I think will help you be more intentional around what you want to do. Like, I created my first businesses because I wanted to be out of debt and I needed to make a lot of money, and it worked out for me. At least not the first one. The first one was an epic failure, but after that, it worked out. Learned a lot from that failure. And then now I'm creating something that I want to create and do. And I'm 36 years old. I'll be 37 in a month. And it still seems young to me. And the average age of the most successful entrepreneurs is actually 40. So you have time. You don't have to go there's very few Mark Zuckerbergs out there, and how that actually happens. Those are just stories that the media loves to perpetuate, but it's a very different environment when you're out there. Small but mighty crew. What would you say to women who want to do a startup or advance their career, but who are looking at the low VC numbers, lower salaries, and facing sexism in the workplace? Yeah, this is, I mean, of that company. So one thing I do is I only invest in BIPOC, that's like Black, Indigenous, persons of color. I only invest in those companies or women-owned companies. And there are VCs who actually do that. So you can go out and find people or angel investors and angel groups who actually put their money where their mouth is. There's few of them out there, but there are, I think, more coming out now. I think the other piece of this too is that I think you're going to face it. One of the things that Suna actually did when, and I love her for this, because the questions that she asks her vendors and people that want to do business with her, she asks these questions of people that she's going to give them money because she's hiring them as her PR firm or whatever it is. But she asks them, what are you doing for pay equity in your company? Not asking, tell me how many news articles you secured for your last clients like us. She's asking very interesting questions that I think we should all be incorporating more. And you should be asking also in your interviews. And one of the things that she did, knowing the abysmal numbers for women in venture capital and what they actually get, she created the candor clause. For anyone that invests in her company, they have to disclose if they've ever been in or named in any type of discrimination lawsuit. And she's open sourced this framework. If you Google it, you can Google candor clause. She was in TechCrunch and a few other things with it. And she's open sourced this for other companies to apply in their own frameworks if they want. But she would not take dollars, knowing that only 1 to 1.5% of women actually get dollars. And of women founded companies, if there's a woman and a man, it's like 7%. I think you have to be prepared for getting a ton of rejections. You're going to get maybe 1 yes for every 100, maybe 200, maybe 300 people that you go after. So you have to get really good with rejection. And I think that that's harder for women, because even when you're younger in psychology, like don't be like go be nice like your sister, like, and the guys are always out, no curfew or whatever. And I don't know if it's different now than when I was growing up, but like you were taught you have to be nice. Even that little poem, girls, sugar and spice, everything nice, and boys like toads or whatever. I don't know, but that's going way back. But I think that it's ingrained in you, and you have to, it's a different environment. You have to be okay with rejection, let it go, move on to the next person, because that was not meant to be. I think the other piece of it is with sexism in the workplace in particular. I have a love-hate relationship with human resources, and I think HR is there to protect the interest of the business, less so of the employee. That is my take on it. And I think is it going to happen? I don't know if it would happen to you. I think that it does happen a lot. And I think you also have to be careful with HR in those instances. I think if you go report it, I've known people and had people close to me who were fired when they did report things. So I think that that's something that's just a reality. And I think the lower salaries in Colorado, this is a lovely law in Colorado, they are not allowed to ask you what you made previously. It's not relevant to the job hunt. You don't need to tell them what you previously made. And in Colorado, it's illegal to do that. Now, they also have to post what is the salary range for that position. I think it's BS that they say don't talk about salaries. You should be talking about your salaries. Also, if you do work in a nonprofit, Google their Form 990. That is a tax statement that they have to submit. You can see what all the executives make. If you're working at a corporate company, look at S1s. Or like a publicly traded, you can read their S1 and you can actually see what the executives are making. They have to publish these salaries in certain instances in business instances. So you can actually go and look at that. Look at pay scale. Pay scale is great, but definitely do your research and expect to negotiate. If you're given a job making $100,000 right out of college, you're like, holy crap, I can't believe I got it. You're just happy for it. No, you negotiate that first offer, because if you don't, and because every job is expecting to negotiate with you. I've hired a lot of people. I always expect them to negotiate. The women never did. And there's a really great book by Margaret A. Neal. She is a Stanford business professor and an expert in negotiation. And definitely pick up her book. It's excellent. Or you can watch her TED Talk if you don't have time to read the book. But she talks about how if you don't negotiate that first salary, let's say they would have offered you $108,000, that's compounded over the course of your life. So you're not going to be able to retire. So maybe money is not that important to you. What about your time? And that $108,000, if you were just happy with 100 over the course of your life, that's going to be, that's your retirement. So if you're not comfortable negotiating, I think you do have to get comfortable with negotiation. It's something that's really helped me. And you seem to have a higher than normal tolerance for failure. What would you say the potential entrepreneurs who are terrified of failing or rejection just get practice dealing with it? I mean, I wore it like a stigma with my first failure. I was always the person, and I wrote about this in my student loan payment, where I also felt that extreme guilt and shame with failure because I was a perfectionist. You have to get rid of perfectionism. And I think that's something that I like about entrepreneurialism, is that if you wait till something's perfect to launch, you've waited too long. You need that feedback. And if you don't get that early enough, then it's like I said, you're waiting too long, and you have to be okay with failing a lot of times. And how do you build that resilience? You don't die. Like I didn't die from it. And I had to get comfortable with that rejection. I think sales honestly helped me. Take a negotiation course. When I started treating it like, oh, this is just something that everybody does. Also, there's a great book called Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. You can find people to help you negotiate. So a mentor relationship is just like me right now, helping you, answering some of your questions. I'm not committed to getting you a job, but a sponsor is someone who's there to help you negotiate, who's there to help vouch for you and put their reputation on the line. It's often a much longer relationship, and it goes both ways. So if I'm a sponsor for someone, you're like, I actually did sponsor someone and helped her get her job at IBM. Now she's getting her PhD, and helped her, and she helped me early on. She didn't have a lot to give me, but she was my intern for a little bit. And then she helped me actually like learn Gen Z lingo and like different things like that. It doesn't have to be like purely transactional in a business sense. Like she helped me understand a market that I was trying to sell to that I was no longer in. So like it's an excellent book. I cannot recommend it enough. It's a really good one. And it uses a lot of case study, and there's so much just good information in there, but a sponsor can help you with it. You don't have to do it alone. Thank you, Russ, for asking questions. I know it's pretty early in the morning, I think, where you are, or late. And Mikey too. Thank you for attending.
We wanted to say thank you so much for stopping by virtually and sharing your knowledge. We would definitely appreciate everything And this will also be posted on our website for anyone, maybe the time was conflicting for them or they had previous engagements. So this will be posted on our website, and we can definitely send you the link as well if you wanted to share with your network.
Okay.
But thank you so much for everyone for showing up, asking questions. Hopefully this helps move anyone who was thinking about entrepreneurship and kind of moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rachel.
Bye.
Bye.